Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. My name is Evan R., and I did not go under the viaduct to be brave. I went because my phone died, and it was the fastest shortcut home. I had taken it before in daylight, always moving quick, always pretending not to notice the tents and the way people slept with their shoes tied together. That night I told myself it was just another walk, just another block, just a few minutes shaved off a longer route. It was late summer, still warm after midnight, the kind of heat that sticks to your clothes. The air felt heavy even before I reached the bridge. The streetlights thinned out as I headed south, replaced by long stretches of shadow and the dull orange glow bouncing off concrete. Traffic overhead hummed and rattled. Trains passing now and then, metal screaming against metal. The sound echoed down into the space beneath the tracks and made everything feel enclosed, like the city pressing down. The viaduct sat low and wide, thick concrete pillars holding up rusted rails that had not been replaced in decades. Water seeped from cracks and ran down the walls in dark streaks. The ground was uneven, broken asphalt mixed with gravel and trash. The smell hit first: old urine, rust, wet cardboard, something sour and sweet underneath that made my stomach tighten. I slowed without meaning to, my body reacting before my mind caught up. I knew people slept there. Everyone did. The city tried to clear it out every few months, but the camps always came back. Tents made from tarps, carts packed tight with bags, mattresses sunk into the dirt. I had seen it all from the road above or from the sidewalk in daylight. At night it felt different. The shadows were deeper. The space felt occupied even when I could not see anyone. As soon as I stepped under the bridge, I heard the whispering. It was soft but steady, carried by the way sound traveled in that space. A voice low and dry, like someone speaking through cotton. At first I thought it was the wind moving through the trash, or someone muttering to themselves in sleep. Then I realized it was numbers, spoken one after another, careful and deliberate. I slowed my pace. The numbers did not follow a clean order. They moved forward, then jumped, then dropped back. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was none of my business. People talked to themselves down there. People lost track of time and thought and words. Still, something about the rhythm made me pay attention. There was focus in it, intention. I told myself maybe the guy needed help, that maybe he was counting medication or trying to stay grounded. That thought made me feel less afraid, more like a decent person for not just rushing past. I took a few steps closer, my shoes crunching on gravel, the sound too loud in my own ears. He sat just beyond one of the pillars, partly hidden by shadow. A milk crate turned upside down served as a seat. He was wrapped in layers of black trash bags, the plastic shiny where the light caught it, all of it held tight with strips of duct tape. His arms were pinned to his sides by the wrapping. Only his hands were free, resting on his knees. His legs were bent at an odd angle, feet bare on the cold ground. His face was what stopped me. It looked wrong in a way that was hard to describe without exaggerating. His skin was stretched tight, pulled thin over sharp bones. His cheeks looked hollow, his mouth drawn into a narrow line. His eyes were wide open, glassy, fixed on a dark stain on the concrete wall across from him. He did not blink, not once. The whites of his eyes were yellowed, veins visible like red threads. The whispering continued, numbers sliding into each other. No pauses, no hesitation. He was not reacting to me at all. It felt like I was not there, like I was just another object in the space. I stood still, unsure what to do, my chest tight. The smell was stronger there, mixed with the sharp, chemical scent of plastic. I noticed his hands then. They were filthy, nails long and dark, fingers twitching slightly with each number. His wrists were bruised where the tape pressed into skin. There were marks on his forearms, thin red lines and scabs, old and new layered together. I felt a wave of unease that went beyond fear. This was not just someone down on their luck. This was someone deeply unwell. The numbers dropped lower. The cadence changed. Slower now. More deliberate. Each word placed like it mattered. My skin prickled. I took a step back, gravel shifting under my heel. That was when I realized he was counting down. I do not know how I knew. There was no clear signal. It was the way the numbers tightened, the way his shoulders drew back slightly, the way his breathing changed. My heart started to race. I told myself to leave. I told myself I had no responsibility here. I turned to go, my body already leaning away. When he reached 0, everything changed at once. He stopped speaking. The silence was sudden and complete, like the air had been sucked out. He stood up in one smooth motion. No struggle. No stiffness. The trash bags rustled softly as he moved. He turned his head toward me without moving his body, neck rotating too far, too easy. His eyes locked onto mine. There was no confusion in his face. No surprise, just focus. I ran. My feet slipped at first, panic throwing off my balance. I caught myself and pushed forward, legs burning as I sprinted out from under the bridge. The darkness seemed to stretch, the exit farther away than it should have been. Behind me, I heard footsteps. They did not sound like mine. Mine were loud, shoes slapping concrete, breath tearing out of my chest. The footsteps behind me were soft, almost wet, bare skin hitting the ground. They were close. Too close. I could hear the rhythm, steady and controlled, matching my pace without effort. I did not look back. I knew if I did, I would slow down. My mind flooded with images I did not want to see. I burst out from under the viaduct and onto the open street, lungs on fire. I ran without direction, cutting down side streets, jumping curbs, not caring if I drew attention. The footsteps stayed with me for longer than made sense, fading only when I reached a stretch with more light and parked cars. By the time I reached my building, my hands were shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice. I slammed the door behind me and locked it, then locked it again, pressing my back against the wood. I stood there listening, heart pounding, expecting to hear breathing on the other side. Nothing came. The hallway was silent. I barely slept. Every sound made me flinch. In the morning I convinced myself it was over, that I had panicked, that the man had never followed me. That fear had filled in the gaps. I checked the news anyway. A body was found under the viaduct that morning. Male. Unidentified. No cause of death listed yet. No signs of trauma mentioned. Just a short paragraph, buried between traffic updates and weather. They did not mention a second person. At first, that made me feel better. Then it made me feel worse. I volunteered at a temporary winter shelter, set up in an old high school gym because of my brother. Years earlier, he had slept under bridges and behind grocery stores, until one night someone noticed him shaking from the cold and brought him inside. That person stayed with him long enough for help to stick. My brother survived because someone decided to care. I carried that fact like a debt that could never be paid back, only forwarded. When the city posted a call for volunteers during a stretch of heavy snow, I signed up without thinking about the building or the hours, or the people I would meet. The gym sat behind a shuttered school on the edge of town. The bricks were stained dark from decades of rain. The parking lot cracked like dry skin. Inside, the heat worked only in certain zones, so the air carried a constant mix of warmth and chill. Folding cots filled the basketball court in neat rows. The smell was sharp and layered. Bleach from rush cleaning. Damp coats, old shoes. Something metallic from the lockers that lined the far wall. Those lockers were tall and narrow, painted a tired green, their vents packed with dust and paper scraps from another era. My shifts were nights, from dusk until morning. The shelter ran on routine because routine kept chaos from taking hold. Intake at 6. Dinner at 7. Lights dimmed at 10. We walked the rows every hour with flashlights, checking breathing, checking blankets, checking for signs of distress. The work felt simple but heavy. Each body carried a story that showed through posture and scars and the way people slept. During my first week, I noticed a man who arrived earlier than everyone else. He always came alone, before intake officially opened, slipping through the side door while staff finished setting up. He sat on the wooden bench near the lockers instead of taking a cot. He wrapped himself in a gray army blanket that looked older than him, the fabric thin from years of washing. He never spoke. He never lined up for food. He never made eye contact. He slept sitting upright with his chin pressed to his chest, arms folded under the blanket. At first I assumed he was protecting his belongings or dealing with back pain. People had reasons. There was a rule that nobody explained at first. It existed in glances and quiet adjustments. Volunteers would steer newcomers away from the bench area. When we did our hourly walks, flashlights skipped over his face. If someone new lingered there, a supervisor would find a task for them elsewhere. The rule was never stated, but it was practiced. Never wake up the man near the lockers. I learned this rule the slow way, by watching reactions. When I asked about him during a training refresher, the coordinator changed the subject. When I tried to offer him water during a lull, another volunteer stepped between us with a box of blankets that needed folding. Nobody was rude. Nobody was dramatic. There was simply a shared understanding that that bench was not to be touched. The man followed the same pattern every night. Early arrival. Bench, blanket. Sleep. At dawn he stood up, folded the blanket with care, placed it on the bench, and walked out before breakfast. His gait was smooth. No limp. No hesitation. He moved like someone following a map only he could see. Once I timed it. From the moment his eyes opened to the moment he reached the door took less than a minute. I tried to build a normal explanation in my head. Maybe he had a condition that made waking dangerous. Maybe he had been violent once. Maybe he carried trauma that triggered panic when disturbed. Shelters accumulate rules like sediment. Each layer formed after something went wrong. The staff did not owe me stories. The gym itself felt tired. The lights buzzed faintly even when steady. The circuit panel dated back decades. We lost power twice during my first month, once during a storm and once for no clear reason. When the lights went out, the darkness pressed close, amplified by the echoing space. We kept emergency lanterns on hand, but the building never felt fully reliable. One night in late January, after a week of freezing rain, a new volunteer joined the night shift. Her name was Sarah. She was younger than most of us, with an energy that had not yet been sanded down by repetition. She moved quickly, eager to help, eager to be useful. She followed the checklist with focus, asking questions where others had stopped asking them. I noticed her watching the bench near the lockers. She tracked the man with curiosity, not fear. When intake ended and the cots filled, she stood there holding a ladle and a cup of soup, scanning faces to make sure nobody was missed. She walked toward the bench. I saw it from across the gym and felt a tightness in my chest that I could not explain. I started toward her, but I was stopped by a knot of people needing blankets. By the time I worked free, she was already there. She leaned in close, careful not to spill. Her hand reached out and touched his shoulder through the blanket. The contact was gentle. There was no sudden movement at first. Then his head lifted. The angle was wrong, not violent, not jerking, just wrong. His neck extended farther than seemed possible, the skin stretching tight. Tendons visible in the harsh overhead light. His eyes were open, but they did not land on anything. They looked past the gym, past the walls. His mouth opened wide, as if drawing breath for a shout, but nothing came out. At the same instant, every light in the gym flickered. The sound was a single collective intake of breath from 100 sleepers stirring. The lights did not go out. They stuttered, dimmed, flared back to full. It lasted less than a second. Enough to register. Enough to imprint. He stood up. The blanket slid off his shoulders and pooled on the floor, revealing clothes that hung loose, layers worn thin. He did not look at Sarah. He did not look at anyone. He walked toward the exit with that same smooth purpose I had seen at dawn, only now it was night. He passed me without slowing. I smelled cold air on him, like metal and snow. He pushed the door open and was gone. The gym fell into a silence that felt fragile, like glass under pressure. Someone turned the lights off earlier than scheduled. People settled back into their cots. The routine resumed because routine always does. Sarah stood where she was, frozen. The cup of soup trembled in her hand, then spilled across the floor. I guided her away from the bench and found her a chair near the supply table. Her skin had gone pale. Her breathing was shallow. She did not speak. I stayed with her until her shift ended, watching the clock inch forward, listening to the hum of the lights as if they might stutter again. After that night, the bench near the lockers was blocked with carts. Chains were wrapped around the locker handles, heavy and loud, threaded through with a thick padlock. The explanation given was safety. The lockers were unstable. Someone could get hurt. The man did not return. The shelter stayed open for 2 more weeks. During that time, volunteers quit at a rate that worried the coordinators. Some left after 1 shift, citing exhaustion. Others stopped answering messages. The gym felt emptier even when full. The air held a tension that made sleep restless. People reported headaches. The lights flickered twice more briefly, always near the lockers. Sarah did not come back. I heard through the coordinator that she had taken sick leave. Later, when the shelter closed early due to staffing shortages, I ran into her by chance at a grocery store. She looked thinner. Her eyes were shadowed. She moved carefully, like someone navigating an invisible obstacle. She did not acknowledge me, and I did not approach her. The distance felt necessary. Months passed. Winter loosened its grip. The school district announced plans to renovate the building. Out of curiosity and a need for closure, I volunteered with a cleanup crew tasked with clearing remaining supplies. The gym was empty, stripped of cots and tables. The bench near the lockers sat bare. The chains were still there, rust beginning to bloom. I spoke with a maintenance supervisor who had been around since the shelter opened. He was practical and tired. I asked about the man near the lockers. I asked why the rule existed. He sighed and told me what he knew. The man had been known to the shelter system for years. He had severe cervical spine instability from an old injury, compounded by long-term malnutrition. His posture was a protective adaptation. Sleeping upright with his chin tucked reduced pressure on damaged vertebrae. Sudden movement or forced extension could cause catastrophic injury or trigger a neurological response. He also suffered from a form of catatonia linked to untreated mental illness. When disturbed, his body could enter a state where voluntary control dropped away, leaving reflexes and rigid movement. His blank stare was dissociation. His silence was not choice. The neck movement that night was a reflexive extension caused by unexpected touch. The angle looked extreme because his muscles lacked normal tone. The lack of sound was not a scream swallowed by the room, but a failure of his vocal cords to engage during a catatonic episode. The walk to the exit was not intent in the way it appeared, but a motor pattern, a path he had walked many times, executed without conscious awareness. The lights flickering had a separate explanation. The bench area sat beneath an old lighting circuit tied to a faulty ballast. Movement near the lockers had been known to jostle the wiring behind the wall. The coincidence of timing burned itself into memory, but coincidence does not need intention to feel meaningful. As for Sarah, the supervisor did not know much. He had heard she was dealing with sleep issues. I learned the rest later through a mutual acquaintance. After that night, Sarah began waking in the early hours sitting upright, chin pressed to her chest, muscles locked. She was aware but unable to move for minutes at a time. The doctors called it sleep paralysis triggered by acute stress. Her mind replayed the posture she had seen, her body mirroring it under the weight of fear. Therapy helped. Time helped. She learned to sleep again, but the habit lingered for months. The shelter closed not because of a curse or a presence, but because people carry what they witness, and sometimes the load is too heavy. Volunteers left because they were not trained for the realities they touched. The chains went up because liability demanded visible action. The man disappeared because the system failed to catch him when he fell through another gap. I think about him often, about the way his blanket folded neatly at dawn, about the map only he seemed to follow. I think about my brother and the thin line between help and harm, between intention and impact. That night did not reveal something unreal hiding in the gym. It revealed how fragile bodies are, how systems strain, how fear grows when understanding lags behind experience. The horror was not in a bent neck or flickering lights. It was in the fact that we built a rule instead of a plan, silence instead of support. It was in the way a single moment can echo through sleep and memory, long after the building is empty. I was 22 and living out of my car because I had burned through every other option. I had left a bad apartment with 2 months of rent unpaid and nowhere lined up. My job at a tire shop paid cash some weeks and nothing on others. I told myself the car was temporary. I parked behind a closed car wash just outside town because it was dark, quiet, and close to a gas station bathroom that stayed open all night. The building was concrete and low, with bays that faced the road and a long blank wall in the back. I tucked my car up against that wall so passing headlights would not sweep over me. The nights were hot and still. I cracked the windows and laid my jacket across the steering wheel so it would not shine. I slept curled on the back seat with my feet jammed behind the driver's seat. Every sound felt loud. A dog barking miles away sounded like it was next to me. Wind pushing trash across asphalt sounded like footsteps. I learned the difference between a car slowing on the road and one that was just passing through. I learned how long the train horn sounded at night and how often it came. I learned the rhythm of that place. There was a small homeless camp past the tree line behind the wash. 6 or 7 people. They had tents made from tarps and shopping carts and broken lawn chairs. Smoke from a small fire drifted low and sweet in the evenings. They kept to themselves. I kept to myself. We shared space without talking. That was an unspoken agreement. I watched them from my mirrors sometimes when I pretended to adjust my seat. They moved like tired animals, slow and careful. They slept early and woke early. They knew how to stay out of sight. One man did not fit. I noticed him the first night, because he was standing while everyone else was settling down. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark jacket even though the air was heavy. He stood at the edge of the lot where the asphalt met the dirt, far enough away that the glow from the streetlight did not reach him. He faced my car. Not straight on, slightly angled, as if his body had stopped but his attention had not caught up yet. I told myself he was just looking around. I turned onto my side and shut my eyes. When I woke an hour later, he was still there. I did not sit up. I did not move. I watched through the crack between the headrest and the door frame. He stood in the same place, same posture. Arms hanging loose. Head tilted a few degrees. Not enough to look strange at first glance. Enough that once I noticed it, I could not ignore it. I waited for him to shift his weight or scratch his face or turn away. He did not. The rest of the camp was quiet. A cough from one tent, the crackle of dying coals, then nothing. I slept again and woke before dawn. He was gone. The second night. I told myself I had imagined it. Stress did strange things when you were tired and hungry. I parked the same way. I ate crackers and peanut butter. I brushed my teeth with a water bottle and spit into the weeds. I laid down and listened. Around midnight, I woke with the same tight feeling in my chest. That sense of being watched that you feel before your brain catches up. I turned my eyes without moving my head. He was there. Same spot. Same angle. Same stillness. I counted my breaths. I stared at the outline of his shoulders. I waited for a phone screen to light up or for him to shift. Nothing happened. The air felt thick. My car felt smaller. I became aware of every inch of glass between us. How thin it was. How easy it would be to break. I closed my eyes and forced myself to sleep. The pattern continued. Every night I stayed there. I woke at least once and saw him standing at the edge of the lot. Always facing my car. Always still. always alone. He never walked in from the camp. He never left in a way I could see. He was simply there when I woke and gone by morning. I watched the others during the day. They moved, talked, argued, laughed. They looked like people who had been worn down but not erased. The man who stood at night was different. I never saw him sit. I never saw him lie down. I never saw him eat. In daylight he was gone. By the fourth night, I was not sleeping more than an hour at a time. I started leaving the car and walking to the gas station, even when I did not need to. The fluorescent lights felt safe. The clerk did not look at me. I drank cheap coffee and watched the clock crawl forward. I tried to convince myself the man was harmless. He had not approached me. He had not knocked. He had not done anything except stand. I told myself he was sick. Maybe he had a mental problem. Maybe he was guarding the camp. Maybe he liked the warmth from the asphalt. Each excuse felt thin. I paid attention to details. His clothes never changed. Dark jacket, dark pants, shoes that looked heavy. His hair was short or shaved. I could not tell. His face stayed in shadow. Once, when the moon was bright, I thought I saw his mouth pull up on one side. That made my stomach twist. I told myself it was a trick of the light. The smell came next. On the sixth night, I woke to a sharp scent that cut through the stale air of my car. Burned oil, melted plastic, something chemical. It drifted in through the cracked window and made my eyes sting. I sat up slowly and looked out. He was closer. Not much closer. Maybe 10 feet from where he had been before. Enough that I could see more of him. The tilt of his head was more obvious. His shoulders were hunched slightly forward, as if he was leaning into a sound. His hands hung open. His fingers were long. The smell seemed to cling to him. It rolled off his clothes like heat off pavement. I locked my doors even though they already were. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I did not sleep again that night. In the morning, I checked the ground where he stood. The dirt was dark and damp. There were footprints pressed deep, toes angled toward my car. They did not move away. They ended there as if he had lifted straight up and vanished. I knew that was not possible. The ground beyond was hard and dry. The prints just faded. I started parking farther back, closer to the trees. It did not matter, he adjusted. Always the same distance. Always the same posture. I noticed things I wish I had not. How his chest barely moved. How long he could stand without shifting. How the nights he was closest were the nights the smell was strongest. I thought about leaving many times. Pride kept me there. The idea that a place had claimed me and pushed me out made me angry. I told myself I would not let fear decide for me. That belief lasted until the night I woke to a sound like breath that was not mine. It was soft and wet, right outside my window. I froze. My eyes opened slowly. He was right there. Not touching the car. Not leaning on it. Standing inches from the glass. I could see his face clearly for the first time. His skin looked tight and shiny, like it had been stretched. His eyes were open wide but unfocused, pointed at the door handle. His mouth was pulled up on one side in a crooked shape that did not change. His head was still tilted. The smell was overwhelming. It filled the car. It made my throat close. I do not remember how long we stayed like that. Time lost its shape. I remember thinking about how easy it would be for him to smash the window. I remember thinking about how no one would hear me scream. I remember thinking about fire, and not knowing why. At some point he stepped back, not turning, not breaking his stare, just moving away until he was a shape again at the edge of the lot. When the sun came up, my hands were still shaking. I sat there until traffic picked up and the noise returned. I watched the camp stir. I watched people crawl out of tents and stretch. I watched them light a fire. I did not see him. That day, I packed everything I owned into the trunk in the back seat. I told myself I would leave that night. I went to work. I dropped a tire on my foot and barely felt it. My mind stayed behind the car wash. I went back one last time to get my jacket that I had left stuffed under the seat. The lot was empty. The camp was quiet. Smoke rose straight up. I felt exposed standing there in daylight. I sat in the driver's seat and stared at the spot where he stood. The ground was darker than the rest of the lot, stained in an uneven circle. It looked like something had soaked in and never dried. I left. 2 days later, I heard sirens while I was driving. Smoke rose ahead of me, thick and black. I pulled over with other cars and watched flames climb the concrete walls of the car wash. Fire crews moved fast. Water sprayed. Glass shattered. The heat hit us even from the road. The next morning, the news said it was arson. They said accelerants were found. They said it started at the back wall, right where I used to park. They said no one was hurt. I drove by later. The building was a blackened shell. The roof had collapsed. The trees behind it were scorched. The ground was torn up by trucks and boots. The camp was gone. No tents. No carts. No chairs. Just ash and ruts and a smell that made my stomach drop. The police report mentioned a person of interest from the nearby camp. A man who kept to himself. A man no one could describe clearly. A man who was seen near the site at night. They said he was not located. I knew why. I had watched him practice standing still for hours. I had watched him learn the place. I had smelled what he carried with him. I had seen the way he listened to something no one else could hear. He was not guarding the camp. He was guarding the fire he planned to set. He was measuring distance. He was waiting for the right moment. He had already decided. I think about how close I was to being there when it burned. I think about how thin the glass was. I think about the way his head tilted, like he was listening to a flame before it was lit. I sleep indoors now. I still wake at night sometimes, heart racing, sure someone is standing just out of sight. I tell myself it is memory, not danger. I tell myself I am safe. I do not park behind closed buildings anymore. I do not ignore the feeling of being watched. I learned that some people do not need to move to be dangerous. Some people are already burning, and they are just looking for a place to spread it. I do not know his name. I never asked. I never needed it. He was part of the corner outside the grocery store, the same way the bike rack was or the yellow paint on the curb. I worked 3 blocks away in a small office that smelled like printer ink and burnt coffee. On my way home, I stopped at that store almost every night. I bought whatever was marked down. Hot food went into paper containers. Bread went into thin bags. I kept the receipts folded in my pocket so I would not forget what I paid for groceries I did not plan to eat. He sat on the concrete near the carts, not blocking the door, not holding a sign. He always kept his back straight. His eyes stayed low. When I handed him food, he nodded once and thanked me twice. The words came out flat and careful. I never stayed long. I never asked questions. I did not want to turn it into something heavy. It was easier to treat it like a routine. I walked. I handed him food. He thanked me. I went home. Over time, I noticed details. The skin around his eyes was tight. His beard grew in uneven patches. His jacket had a torn lining that showed gray stuffing. His shoes were worn down at the heels. When it rained, he pulled a plastic poncho from his bag and sat the same way. When it was cold, he wrapped his hands in socks. I liked that he never asked for anything. He took what I gave and never looked into the bag. It made the act clean. It did not feel like charity. It felt like balance. In early fall, I stopped seeing him. At first, I thought I missed him because of my schedule. I worked late one night. Another night, I took a different route. By the 4th day, the space where he sat stayed empty no matter the hour. The concrete looked lighter without him. The carts clanged together in the wind. I stood there longer than usual, holding a container that was already cooling. I waited. No one came. A week passed. I told myself he moved on. People did. That corner was not safe. Police cars cruised by. The store changed managers. Sometimes they told people to leave. I felt a small relief mixed with guilt. I carried food home and put it in the fridge. I ate leftovers meant for someone else. On the 8th day, I saw him again. He sat in the same place. His posture was the same. His clothes were different. The jacket was gone. He wore a dark sweatshirt that fit him better. His pants looked washed. His shoes were cleaner. The socks on his hands were gone. His hands were bare and red. The skin was cracked along the knuckles. Under his nails the color was dark. Not grease. Not dirt that sat on the surface. It looked ground in. It made his fingers look blunt. When I got close, I smelled something I had not smelled on him before. It was not sweat or trash. It was wet soil. The smell you get when you dig after rain. Heavy and deep. It clung to him even in the open air. I handed him the food. He nodded. He thanked me twice. His voice sounded the same. His eyes lifted for a moment and then dropped again. I noticed his pupils were wide even under the store lights. I wanted to ask where he had been. I wanted to ask about the smell. I did not. I told myself not to pry. People on the street did not owe me stories. As I turned to leave, he added something. He spoke without looking up. He explained that he had found a place to stay. Underground. He described it as dry and quiet. He said it smiled when he agreed. I laughed. It came out fast. The idea sounded like a joke, a strange phrase. People said strange things all the time. I told myself it was a figure of speech, a grate that looked like a grin, a shelter with a friendly intake worker, a relief I did not understand. I walked home thinking about the smell. I washed my hands longer than usual. I checked my shoes for mud. There was none. The next night I brought food again. He was not there. The space was empty in a different way. The carts were lined up. The concrete looked swept. In the place where he usually sat there was a neat stack of clothes. His old jacket folded into a square. The sweatshirt folded on top. The pants folded clean. The socks placed side by side. It looked careful. Too careful. I stood there longer than I should have. People walked past me. A car honked. The store doors slid open and closed. No one else looked at the pile. On top of the clothes sat a piece of cardboard. It was cut from a box. The edges were clean. In the center was my name. It was written in my handwriting. The letters leaned the same way. The curve of the S matched. The loop in the G was narrow. The tail of the last letter trailed off the same way it did on my grocery lists. My first thought was that it was a joke. Someone copying my name from a receipt. Someone trying to scare me. The second thought was that no one else knew my name. I never told him. I never wore a badge. I paid with a card, but receipts did not show names. I looked around. I felt heat in my face. I picked up the cardboard. It felt dry. The marker smell was faint. The ink was fully set. I left the clothes where they were. I put the cardboard in my bag without thinking. My hands shook. I went home and locked the door behind me. I spread the cardboard on my table. I compared the letters to my notebook. I compared the pressure. It matched. The spacing matched. It was not perfect, but it was close enough to make my chest tighten. I slept badly. I dreamed of damp spaces and narrow passages. I woke with the smell of soil in my nose. The next day I went back to the store during lunch. The clothes were gone. The concrete was bare. The manager said nothing when I lingered. I did not ask. I started paying attention to my routines. I changed routes. I looked over my shoulder. I checked reflections in windows. Nothing stood out. The city felt louder. At work I pulled a file from a cabinet and found a receipt tucked inside. It was mine. I recognized the total. I realized how easy it would be to find my name if someone went through trash. My desk was near the break room. People dug through bins for bottles. Someone with time could collect paper. Someone with patience could practice copying letters. That night I dreamed of hands, nails packed with dirt, fingers pressing into wet earth. I went to the store the next evening with no food. I told myself I needed closure. I stood near the carts. I watched people come and go. I waited until the lights dimmed. He did not appear. Over the next week I learned more than I wanted to. I noticed a grate near the store that I had never looked at before. It was wide and set back behind a hedge. Rainwater ran into it. The bars curved slightly. From a distance it did look like a smile. I noticed dirt tracked along the sidewalk in a thin line after rain. It led toward an alley behind the store. The alley smelled damp even on dry days. I followed it once in daylight. It ended at a locked door with a warning sign about utilities. The ground near the door was scuffed. The soil was dark. I talked to a coworker who lived in the area longer than I had. I did not mention the man. I asked about tunnels. She mentioned old storm drains, abandoned utility access, places people used to hide during winter. She said some were dry. Some had makeshift rooms. She said it was dangerous. She said people went missing down there. I went home and searched public records. I learned about a network of drains built decades ago. I learned about illegal access points. I learned about accidents and fires and collapses. I learned about people who lived underground for years. I learned about how they carried soil on their clothes, how their nails turned black. The smile made sense then, the grin of the great. The way agreeing to go down felt like being accepted by a place that did not care who you were. What did not make sense was my name. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence. Someone with the same name. A trick of my mind. The handwriting stopped me every time. I started noticing small things around my apartment. A drawer left open. A window unlocked. I blamed myself. I lived alone. I rushed in the mornings. I forgot. One evening I came home to find my trash moved. The bag was tied, but the knot was different. I went cold. I stood in the kitchen listening. The apartment was quiet. I did not call anyone. I cleaned. I wiped surfaces. I put a chair under the door handle and slept on the couch. The next day I took time off work. I went through my own trash from the last week. Receipts, notes, envelopes. I imagined someone collecting them. I imagined someone practicing my letters in a quiet space underground. I went back to the grocery store in the afternoon. I walked around the building. I found a broken fence behind the alley. Beyond it the ground dipped. A faint path led through weeds to a concrete opening half hidden by plywood. The wood was loose. The smell of wet soil drifted out. I did not go inside. I stood there long enough to hear movement, a scrape, a breath. I backed away. My heart hammered. I left. That night I called the city. I reported a safety hazard. I mentioned the opening. I mentioned people living underground. I did not mention my name on cardboard. I did not mention the man. I did not want to explain that part. 2 days later the opening was sealed. The workers in vests hammered boards and poured concrete. They put up a fence. The alley smelled like dust instead of damp. I thought that would be the end. It was not. A week after the sealing I found another piece of cardboard on my doorstep. It was tucked under the mat. My name was written again. The handwriting was closer this time. The pressure was heavier. There were marks where the pen paused. Under my name was a list. Times, dates, places, my office, the grocery store, my apartment. Notes about when lights were on. Notes about when I left. It was careful. It was accurate. At the bottom was a sentence written smaller. It explained that the place had been taken from him. It explained that he had agreed, and it smiled, and now it was gone. It explained that he needed help. There was no threat. There was no demand. It read like a record. I did not sleep. I packed a bag. I stayed with a friend across town. I filed a report. I showed the cardboard. I showed the handwriting comparison. The officer listened. He nodded. He said they would look into it. He said it was likely someone experiencing a crisis. He said to stay elsewhere for a while. They found him 3 days later. He was alive. He was found in another drain miles away. He was hypothermic. His hands were damaged. His nails were black. He had a notebook filled with letters, pages of names, pages of practice. My name appeared often. My routines were mapped. He had followed me because I was kind, because I was consistent, because I brought food and did not ask questions, because I was safe. They told me he had lost his underground place when it was sealed. They told me he believed places had moods, that he believed agreeing to live somewhere meant a kind of permission. They told me he had begun to attach that idea to people, that he thought agreement worked the same way. The handwriting was explained. He had taken my trash. He had practiced. He had time. Underground days are long. The smell was explained. Wet soil, concrete dust, mold. The folded clothes were explained. He believed in order. He believed leaving things neat showed respect. He believed I would understand. I moved after that. I changed my routines. I still bring food to people sometimes. I leave it at shelters now. I do not linger. I do not create patterns. I pass that grocery store on occasion. The carts still clatter. The curb is still yellow. The grate behind the hedge is sealed. It no longer looks like a smile. I think about him when it rains. I think about how easy it is to be seen when you are trying to do something simple. I think about how attention can feel like agreement. I think about how places and people can both seem to accept you when you are desperate. I know his name now. It is in a report I keep in a folder I rarely open. Knowing it does not make me feel better. It does not make the memory smaller. The ending is not a mystery. It is not a curse. It is a lesson I did not ask for. I was seen. He followed. He lost his shelter. He reached for the one person who noticed him. The rest is a series of choices and consequences that make sense when laid out in order. I do not forget the smell. I do not forget the handwriting. I do not forget the way kindness can look like permission to someone who has nothing else. There were 3 of us that night, me, Jake, and Louis, and we had been walking freight lines together for months. We were not thrill seekers. We worked day jobs, paid rent, and slept normal hours most of the week. Urban exploring was something we did when we wanted quiet and space, places where nobody expected anything from us. Abandoned yards were empty in a way that felt honest. Rusted steel did not judge you. Broken concrete did not ask questions. You walked, you looked, you left. The freight yard sat on the edge of town, past the last warehouse, and before the river cut everything in half. Trains still passed through during the day, but the company stopped using most of the sidelines years earlier. Boxcars sat in rows like teeth in a jaw that had forgotten how to chew. Some were tagged with paint that had faded to chalk. Some had doors welded shut. Others hung open, black inside, smelling of oil, wet wood, and old iron. We knew homeless people stayed there. Everyone knew. You could see signs if you paid attention. Burn marks where fires had been lit inside barrels. Mattresses dragged halfway into cars. Plastic bags caught on rusted ladders. We never bothered them and they never bothered us. That was the understanding. You stay on your side and keep moving. It was late summer. The air was warm but heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes every smell stronger. We parked near a closed loading dock and walked in without lights at first, letting our eyes adjust. The only sound was metal ticking as it cooled and the distant rush of traffic on the bridge. We moved between cars, reading old serial numbers, peering into empty shells. We took photos. We laughed quietly. Everything felt normal. Then I noticed footsteps that were not ours. At first I thought it was an echo. Sound carries strangely around steel. You hear yourself twice, sometimes 3 times. But these steps were out of rhythm. We would stop and they would stop. We would start again and they followed, always a few seconds behind. I turned and saw him standing between 2 boxcars about 20 feet back. He did not move when I looked at him. He did not step forward or turn away. He just stood there. He was thin, not sickly thin but worn down, like someone who had been losing weight slowly for years. His clothes hung wrong on his body, too big in some places and too tight in others. Dirt had worked into the fabric, until it looked like part of the cloth. His hair was short but uneven, like it had been cut with scissors by someone who stopped caring halfway through. What struck me most was his face. I did not have words for it then. I do now. It looked unfinished. His features were there but flat, as if someone had pressed them into clay and never sharpened the edges. His eyes were set too far apart. His mouth rested open just enough to show teeth. His skin had an odd tone, not pale, not dark, just wrong, like it had not decided what it wanted to be. He watched us without blinking. I told myself he was just another guy staying out there, curious about new people. That happened sometimes. We kept moving, he followed. Car to car, aisle to aisle, always the same distance behind. He never closed the gap. He never fell back. When we sped up, he sped up. When we slowed, he slowed. No sound except his steps, careful, measured, like he was counting them. Jake noticed next. He glanced back and laughed it off, making a show of not caring. Louis stayed quiet. I could tell he was tense by the way his shoulders crept up toward his ears. The man never asked for anything. No money, no cigarettes, no food. He never spoke. He just watched us move through the yard, like we were part of something he was waiting for. We cut through a narrow space between two cars that forced us into single file. The metal sides were close enough to brush our arms. I went first, then Jake, then Louis. When I came out the other side and turned, the man was already there, closer now. Close enough that I could smell him. He smelled like old sweat and river water. That was when he spoke. He said Jake's full name. First, middle, last. Clear and flat, like he was reading it off a card. I felt the air change. You know when a room goes quiet even though nothing has changed. That feeling hit all at once. Jake froze. His face drained of color. Louis swore under his breath. None of us had told this man anything. We had not spoken loud enough for anyone to hear names. We did not know him. He had no phone in his hands. No one else was around. We ran. We did not plan it, we just moved. Boots slammed on gravel. Breath tore out of our chests. I did not look back. I could hear him behind us, still not running, still keeping pace. The yard seemed larger when panic took over. Rows stretched longer, paths twisted. My lungs burned. I heard Jake stumble and go down. I heard Louis shout his name. I kept running for another few steps before I realized I was alone. I turned back. Jake was not there. Louis and I stood there bent over, trying to catch our breath, listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the hum of insects and the far-off sound of a train horn. We waited. 30 seconds. A minute. It felt wrong to stay still, but it felt worse to run without him. We moved back the way we came, calling his name once, then stopping ourselves. Sound felt dangerous now. We found him standing by a concrete wall at the edge of the yard, one of the old loading walls stained with rust and moss. He was upright, hands at his sides, staring at the surface like he was reading something written there. His face was calm. Too calm. We asked if he was hurt. He turned slowly and looked at us. His eyes focused a fraction of a second too late. He said he was fine. He said the man helped him up. That sentence stuck with me because of how it sounded. Not the words, but the shape of it. It was stiff, careful, like he was choosing each piece instead of letting it come naturally. We left after that. We did not explore anymore. We walked straight back to the car, looking over our shoulders the whole way. The man did not follow us again. He was gone, like he had never been there at all. On the drive home, Jake sat in the back seat and stared out the window. He did not joke. He did not scroll on his phone. He did not do any of the things he usually did when he wanted to shake something off. He sat upright, hands folded, eyes wide and unblinking. I told myself he was in shock. People react differently. Some get loud. Some get quiet. Over the next few weeks, things did not go back to normal. Jake stopped using contractions when he spoke. He would say I am instead of I am tired. He would say do not instead of don't. It sounds small, but once you notice it, you cannot stop hearing it. His sentences sounded like they were written first and spoken later. He also stopped blinking the way people do. He would stare for long stretches without moving his eyes, then blink several times in a row, hard like he was reminding himself how. He washed his hands constantly. He lined his shoes up perfectly by the door. He ate the same meals every day at the same time. He did not explain any of it. If we asked, he said it helped him think clearly. Louis drifted away first. He stopped coming around. He stopped answering messages. I think he wanted distance from anything that reminded him of that night. I stayed. Jake was my friend. I did not want to believe anything was wrong that could not be fixed with time. We did research. Quietly. We looked into identity theft, online stalking, anything that could explain how a stranger knew his full name. Jake had posted photos from the yard before. Old ones. It was possible someone had followed us online, pieced things together. It was possible. But that did not explain the change in him. He began talking about simplicity, about reducing noise, about removing parts of his life that did not serve a purpose. He quit his job. He sold his car. He gave away furniture. He said possessions created friction. He stopped sleeping much. When he did sleep, he slept sitting up. 3 months after the yard, he left. He packed a backpack with clothes, a notebook, and nothing else. He said he needed to live simply for a while. He said he would check in. He did not. We reported him missing after a week. The police took the report and nodded. He was an adult. He left by choice. There was nothing they could do. Winter came early that year. The river froze at the edges. Snow piled under the bridges where no one cleared it. I saw him by accident. I was driving home late one night and took a different route to avoid traffic. As I passed under the main bridge, headlights caught movement. A figure stepped back from the road, shielding his eyes. I pulled over. He was thinner now. His face had collapsed inward. Cheekbones sharp, eyes sunk deep. Dirt covered his clothes. His hair was longer and matted. I said his name. He looked at me like I was a stranger. No flicker of recognition. No confusion. Just a flat, polite look, the kind you give someone who asks you for directions. He did not recognize me. He did not recognize our history. He did not recognize himself. I learned later. Through a social worker I contacted, what likely happened. The man in the yard was known. He had been in and out of shelters for years. He suffered from a severe mental illness and a traumatic brain injury from an accident decades earlier. He fixated on people. He studied them. He followed them. He learned everything he could. Names, patterns, habits. He mirrored speech. He mirrored posture. He believed that by doing this he could take parts of them into himself. Jake fell. He hit his head. Not hard enough to leave a mark, but hard enough. Combined with fear, exhaustion, and whatever that man said to him while they were alone, something cracked. Jake did not get possessed. He did not get replaced. He broke. The changes were symptoms, the rigid speech, the staring, the need for control, the fixation on simplicity. They were ways to hold himself together after something slipped out of place. Without treatment, without rest, without accepting help, he drifted toward the only model his mind had latched onto. The man who had stood behind us and watched. The man who lived without possessions. The man who survived outside the rules. By the time I saw him under the bridge, he was not pretending. He was not acting. He was living the only way his damaged mind allowed. I still pass that freight yard sometimes. The cars are still there. Rust spreads slowly. Moss creeps along the concrete. I do not go inside anymore. Some places do not hurt you directly. They just put you close enough to someone who can. December 2015 sat heavy in my memory because of how ordinary it began. I worked early shifts then, the kind that pull you out of sleep while the rest of the city still pretends it is night. My alarm rang at 5. I showered in silence, dressed in the same dark clothes, ate nothing. By 6 I was out the door. The air was cold enough to sting but not enough to wake me fully. The streets were mostly empty. Traffic lights cycled pointlessly. Storefronts stayed dark. Everything felt paused. On my route to work there was a small ATM booth attached to the side of a closed grocery store. It was not inside the store. It was a narrow concrete box with glass on 3 sides and a door that never locked. The bank logo above it flickered. I stopped there almost every weekday. I liked routine. I liked knowing where my hands would go and what would happen next. The ATM felt safe because it was predictable. A homeless woman slept inside that booth most mornings. I noticed her the first week I started using it. She always curled up against the back wall with her knees drawn in and her coat pulled over her head. She never asked for money. She never moved while I was there. She breathed slow. She smelled like old fabric and the city. I stepped around her without thinking much about it. In the early hours, people share space without talking. It is an unspoken agreement. Over time, she became part of the place. I expected her. When she was not there one morning, I felt a small sense of loss, like something missing from a picture. Then she came back the next day, curled up, silent, always in the same spot, always facing the wall behind the machine. I never saw her face. That December morning, I reached the booth at around 6:10. The sky had just begun to thin from black to a dull gray. The streetlights were still on. My breath fogged the glass as I opened the door. I remember noticing how quiet it was. Even the usual distant traffic noise felt muted. The woman was not curled up. She was standing. She stood a foot away from the wall, facing it, her back to the door and to me. Her coat hung loose on her shoulders. Her arms were at her sides. She was very still. The posture felt wrong. People who sleep rough move slowly when they wake. They stretch. They shift. She did none of that. I stopped just inside the door. The booth smelled the same as always. Warm electronics and stale air. The machine hummed. The light from the screen cast a pale square on the wall in front of her. Her reflection showed in the glass panel to my right. The booth had glass walls that acted like mirrors before dawn. I saw the back of her head in front of me and the front of her in the reflection. That was when I noticed the delay. She raised her arm. I saw it lift in front of me. In the reflection, the arm followed a moment later. It was subtle but clear. A fraction of a second. Enough to feel wrong. I stood there watching. My heart rate picked up. She lowered her arm. The reflection lagged again. When she turned her head slightly to the side, the reflection did not follow at the same time. It stayed facing forward for a beat, then turned. I had no language for what I was seeing. My brain tried to make it fit into something normal. I thought about warped glass. I thought about reflections bending. But I had stood in that booth hundreds of times. I knew how it looked. I took a step back. The door creaked. The sound felt loud. She did not turn around. She did not react. Then she produced words. I did not hear them as coming from behind me or from the machine. I heard them as if they came from my own mouth. The tone, the pace, the slight rasp from early mornings. It matched exactly. The words themselves registered a second later. They referred to my routine, to my timing, to the fact that I was early. I froze. My skin prickled. I could feel the blood in my ears. I did not respond. I did not know how. My body decided before my mind did. I backed away slowly and left the booth. I did not run. I walked fast enough to keep control. I did not look back. I went to work without cash that day. I sat through my shift in a haze. I replayed the moment again and again, searching for a rational explanation. The reflection delay bothered me more than the voice. The voice could have been coincidence. People sometimes sound alike. The words could have been a guess. But the reflection felt mechanical, like a screen buffering. That night I searched online. I looked up ATM booth designs. I read about security glass, about mirrored films and privacy coatings. Some booths had digital advertising panels embedded behind glass. Some used camera feeds to show your face on the screen while you typed. Those feeds had latency, a delay of a fraction of a second. I went back the next morning, driven by the need to understand. The booth was empty. The woman was gone. The floor was bare. No blanket. No coat. I stood where she had stood and moved my arm. The reflection lagged. Not always, but sometimes depending on where I stood. The glass panel had a thin screen embedded in it. It was subtle, almost invisible in daylight. At night it acted like a mirror. In low light the camera feed kicked in. I felt a rush of relief mixed with embarrassment. I told myself I had misread the situation. That fear had filled in the gaps. The woman had been facing the wall because she was using the heat vent. She might have been talking to herself. The voice matching mine could have been my own inner narration bleeding into memory. Stress does strange things. I used the ATM once more that week. During the day, nothing happened. Still, something felt off. The booth felt smaller. The glass felt too aware. 2 weeks later the booth was boarded up. Plywood covered the door and the glass. A printed notice was taped to the wood, explaining temporary closure due to an incident. People at work talked about it. A man had gone inside late at night. He claimed he saw himself inside, trapped, asking to be let out. Security footage showed him entering alone and leaving in a panic. I watched the footage when it circulated online. It showed the man stepping into the booth. It showed the reflection delay clearly. It showed the embedded screen glitching, replaying a cached image of the last user. It showed audio feedback from the speaker picking up ambient sound and playing it back with delay. A loop. The explanation was simple. The machine had been updated with a new interface that week. The camera feed had a bug. The audio system had a feedback issue. In low light, the glass acted like a mirror over the screen. People saw themselves not matching in time. They heard their own voice played back with delay. It created the illusion of another presence. As for the homeless woman, outreach workers later confirmed she had been using the booth for warmth. She had a habit of mimicking voices she heard, a coping mechanism from years on the street. She likely repeated something she had heard me say before on other mornings. My voice, recorded in my memory, filled in the rest. Knowing all this did not erase the feeling. Understanding the mechanics did not change how it felt to stand there and hear myself from another mouth, to see movement out of sync with reality. The booth was dismantled soon after. A new ATM was installed inside the store with proper lighting and no glass walls. I never used that route again. I changed my routine. I learned that fear does not always come from the unreal. Sometimes it comes from the moment when familiar systems slip just enough to remind you how thin the layer of normal really is. I was homeless for 6 months after my divorce, and that time stretched longer than it sounds. Each day had weight. Each night had its own rules. I slept wherever the city allowed me to exist without pushing back too hard. Parks where sprinklers clicked on before dawn. Bus stations where the air smelled of oil and old coffee. Empty corners behind closed shops. Sometimes I slept near others, not for safety in numbers, but because being alone made every sound feel aimed at me. When you lose a home, you do not just lose walls and a door. You lose a sense of scale. Everything feels closer than it should. The riverbank was one of those places that felt open and quiet. It ran behind a stretch of warehouses and weeds, far enough from traffic that the nights felt padded. The water moved slow there, wide and dark, catching light from distant bridges. People slept along it because there was space, and because police rarely came. I ended up there after a week of bad nights where sleep never took hold. The ground near the water stayed cooler. The air moved. I told myself that mattered. There was a man named Cal who spent time near the river during the day but never stayed after dark. He looked older than me, but not by much. His beard grew uneven, and his clothes smelled of smoke and soap. He had habits that showed time spent outside, careful folding of blankets, shoes placed side by side even when the ground was mud. He paid attention to small things. He warned me without raising his voice, without urgency. Like someone stating a fact learned the hard way. He said the riverbank was not a place to sleep, because something down there learned faces. He did not explain what he meant. He did not stay to see if I listened. I did not listen because exhaustion dulls judgment. I told myself he was talking from stress, from heat, from stories that grow in shared misery. I told myself water reflects faces and people imagine patterns. I told myself many things that night. The truth was simple. I wanted sleep more than caution. I laid my backpack under my head and stretched out with my feet toward the water. The bank sloped gently, packed dirt mixed with broken glass and bits of metal that glittered faintly. I found a spot that felt smooth enough. The river made a low sound, steady and patient. Bugs skimmed the surface. The sky held no stars, just a pale smear where clouds caught city light. I remember thinking the place felt almost peaceful. Sleep came fast, heavy, without dreams at first. Then it shifted. I dreamed I was standing upright in water that reached my chest. My feet were planted, but the water kept rising. I tried to breathe and could not. My arms felt pinned to my sides. The surface climbed past my mouth, my nose, my eyes. I remember the sensation of pressure more than panic. A thick weight pressing inward, as if my own body was closing. I tried to shout and felt nothing move. I felt myself tipping without falling. I woke with my heart racing and my lungs burning, gasping air that tasted of damp earth. I was still on the bank dry, my clothes stiff with dirt. The river moved the same as before. For a moment I could not place where I was. My body thought I had almost died. That feeling does not fade quickly. I sat up and leaned forward, hands on my knees, letting my breath slow. The water lay inches away. In the dark, it looked flat and endless. I caught my reflection without meaning to. My face hovered on the surface, stretched and dim. When I blinked, the reflection blinked a moment later. Not enough to call it a trick of light. Enough to notice. I stared until my eyes hurt. I blinked again, slower. The reflection lagged again. I moved my head, watched the shape follow with delay, as if the surface held on to me for a beat before letting go. My first thought was that the current was uneven, that ripples were playing tricks. I shifted closer, then farther. The delay stayed. My reflection looked tired, more tired than I felt, eyes sunk deeper. I rubbed my face with my hands and looked again. The reflection did not mirror the movement exactly. The timing stayed off. I stood up, suddenly cold, and stepped back from the edge. The reflection stretched and broke, pieces drifting apart. I told myself the dream had left my senses raw. I told myself fatigue can cause misfires in perception. I walked away from the water and sat on a piece of concrete, watching from a distance. When I looked again, the surface showed only dark movement and scattered light. No face. I stayed awake until dawn. Morning came thin and gray. People stirred along the bank, packs shifting, bodies rising stiffly. I looked for Cal without fully knowing why. He was not there. His spot stayed empty, his careful habits gone. Others were missing too. Not all, but enough to notice. The places where they had slept showed flattened dirt, nothing else. No bags. No blankets. It felt wrong, like a room with chairs missing. I spent the day restless, unable to settle. I walked the city until my legs shook. Every reflective surface caught my eye. Store windows, puddles, the dark glass of bus stops. I watched my face look back, waiting for delay. It did not happen again that day. By night, exhaustion returned. I avoided the river. Over the next weeks, I heard fragments without hearing conversations. Ambulances near the water late at night. Police tape once, gone by morning. A smell that lingered for days. I learned through observation that people vanished in small numbers, enough to feel personal, but not enough to make news. I also learned that staying near the river made sleep deeper, but waking harder. People who slept there moved slower, eyes unfocused, speech thick. I saw one man stare at his hands for a long time, turning them as if they belonged to someone else. I stayed away, but the dream returned. Standing upright, drowning without falling. Each time I woke, my body reacted as if the danger was present. Sweat soaked my shirt even in cool air. My chest hurt. I began to understand that the dream was not about water. It was about being held in place while something closed in. Weeks passed. Hunger and stress wore me down. One night, after hours of pacing and failing to find rest, I went back to the riverbank. I told myself it would be just for one night, that daylight would come soon enough. I chose a spot farther from the edge. I did not look at the water. Sleep took me again, faster than I wanted. The dream returned with more detail. I felt the river press against my skin. I felt my face strain as if making an expression that did not belong to me. I felt watched without seeing eyes. I woke to a sound that might have been my own breath echoing off the water. I opened my eyes and saw the river behind me, in the dark glass of a warehouse window. I had not turned. The image was wrong. The angle did not make sense. I rolled onto my side and faced the window directly. My reflection lay there, eyes open, and behind it the river moved. Not a memory, not imagination. The glass reflected both me and the water that should not have been there. I moved my arm. The reflection followed with the same slight delay as before. I stood up, heart pounding, and backed away. The image stayed until I stepped into deeper shadow. Then it vanished. I left the bank before dawn, walking until the sun rose enough to burn the fog away. I did not sleep near water again. Even fountains made me uneasy. I learned to read my own stress responses, the way my mind filled gaps with threat. I understood that my brain was looking for patterns to explain fear. I read about dissociation in a library, about how trauma can bend perception. The river became a symbol my mind used to hold everything I could not process. Faces learned by water became a way to describe how seeing myself reflected in that place changed me. The delay was my own lag, my sense of self falling behind my body under strain. Cal never returned because many people do not survive that stretch of life. Some find beds. Some find jails. Some find the river in ways that leave no reflection behind. The missing people were not taken by anything unseen. They were worn down, careless, sick, or lost to choices made under pressure. I got out 2 weeks later because an outreach worker put my name on a list and followed up. I found work through a day labor place. I saved enough for a room. Stability came slow, built from routine and sleep that did not end in panic. Therapy helped me understand how the mind protects itself by bending reality when reality feels unbearable. Sometimes, in mirrors, I still see the river behind me. It happens when I am overtired or stressed, when my mind slips. I know what it is. A memory laid over the present. A warning my brain learned to send. I ground myself, touch something solid, name where I am. The image fades. It does not frighten me anymore. It reminds me how close I came to losing myself, not to water, but to the quiet erosion that happens when no one sees you, and you stop seeing yourself clearly. February 2021 sits in my memory with a sharp clarity because nothing about that night ever softened with time. It was around 3:30 a.m. when I was driving home through a snowstorm that had rolled in faster than forecast. The roads were barely plowed, the kind of thick snow that absorbs sound and turns the world small. I had just finished a late shift at a warehouse on the edge of town, one of those places built far from everything else, surrounded by open land and service roads that only delivery trucks and tired workers use. I had taken that route hundreds of times. I knew every bend, every shallow ditch, every stretch where the wind always cut harder. That night, the familiar road felt wrong, like it had been moved somewhere else while I was inside working. Snow came down in wide flakes that stuck to the windshield before the wipers could clear them. The heater was on high, air blasting my feet and fogging the lower corners of the glass. My hands ached from gripping the wheel too tightly, knuckles stiff from cold despite the heat. Outside, everything was gray and white, no clear horizon, just darkness swallowed by snow. The radio had faded into static miles back, so the only sound was the hum of the engine and the steady scrape of the wipers. I was alert in the way you get when the road demands it. Every sense narrowed to what was right in front of the hood. I remember thinking about how dangerous it would be if I slid off, how long it would take for someone to find me out there. Cell service was unreliable on that stretch. I had passed one abandoned rest pull-off a mile back, buried under drifts, and there were no houses for several more miles. That awareness made the sight of movement ahead stand out immediately. At first it looked like a shadow shifting at the edge of the headlights. I eased off the gas, eyes straining. Then I saw a person stepping closer to the road, one arm raised, the motion slow and unsteady. A man stood near the shoulder, snow collecting on his shoulders and head. He was waving, not urgently, just lifting his hand and lowering it again, as if unsure whether he should be doing it at all. My first reaction was fear, not panic, but a tightening in my chest and a rush of thoughts about how alone I was out there. The second reaction was guilt. The temperature had dropped well below freezing. Anyone standing out there for long would be in real danger. I thought about how I would feel if I drove past and later heard about someone found frozen near the road. I imagined explaining it to myself and knowing it would never sit right. I slowed to a stop a few yards ahead of him and put the car in park. Snow piled against the tires almost immediately. The man moved closer, his steps careful, like he was trying not to fall. In the headlights I could see he was homeless, or at least looked that way. His clothes were thin and worn, a jacket that had lost its padding long ago, gloves with the fingers frayed open, shoes soaked through. His face was red and raw from the cold, beard stiff with ice at the ends. He looked older up close, maybe late 50s or early 60s, but hard living can blur those estimates. I unlocked the passenger door and reached across to push it open. The cold rushed in, sharp and biting. Snow blew across the seat. He got in without hesitation, lowering himself heavily, bringing a cloud of snow with him. I shut the door quickly, sealing us back into the bubble of heat and noise. The first thing that hit me was not his smell, which I had expected to be strong. It was the heat coming off him. It was immediate and noticeable, like sitting next to someone who had been standing too close to a fire. His clothes were damp, but his skin radiated warmth through them. I could feel it on my arm even though I had pulled my sleeve down. That warmth did not make sense. He had been standing outside in a snowstorm. My own hands were still cold from the walk to the car earlier, and I had gloves and a coat then. I glanced at his arms and neck. His skin looked flushed, almost swollen. There was a sheen to it, like sweat. He did not shiver. His breathing was steady and quiet. There was no visible fog of breath in front of his face, even though mine was already clouding the air. I tried to process that while putting the car back in gear. The road ahead was empty, the storm thickening. I focused on keeping the tires straight and the speed low. My mind kept returning to the sensation of heat beside me, the way it felt wrong in that cold world. He did not look around much. He stared straight ahead, eyes half open, unfocused. Snow melted off his jacket and dripped onto the seat and floor, forming dark patches in the fabric. The smell I noticed then was not rot or alcohol, but something sharp and sour, like old sweat mixed with chemicals. It clung to the air. He gestured forward with his hand, a slow movement that seemed to take effort. He indicated that he wanted to go straight, farther down the same road. There was no attempt to explain beyond that. I nodded to myself, deciding I would drive until we reached the next lit area or intersection, somewhere I could drop him off safely or call for help. The heater worked harder, pushing warm air into the car. The windows began to fog more heavily. I adjusted the vents, directing air at the windshield, but the fog thickened instead of clearing. Frost began to form along the edges, creeping inward. It was not the usual outside frost. This was coming from inside, a thin white film spreading where the glass met the cold night. I noticed that my own breath was coming faster. Each exhale bloomed white in front of my face, then faded. The man beside me still showed nothing. His chest rose and fell, but the air around him stayed clear. My skin prickled with unease. I cracked the window slightly, letting in a blade of cold air. It did nothing to reduce the fog. The frost continued to spread. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white. The road narrowed as drifts encroached from both sides. The headlights carved a tunnel through the snow, visibility shrinking. I glanced at the passenger seat again. The man's face looked different in the changing light, features slack, eyes glassy. His skin looked too tight, stretched, as if swollen from something under the surface. His jacket was soaked through now, water pooling on the seat. I began to consider that he might be very sick. Severe infections can cause fever so high the body feels hot to the touch. Alcohol can make people feel warm while actually losing heat. I had heard of hypothermia causing confusion, people undressing in the cold because they feel overheated. None of that explained the lack of breath fog, but my mind grabbed at any explanation that did not involve something impossible. The sense of wrongness kept building. The frost on the windshield reached the center, narrowing my view to a small clear patch I kept wiping with my sleeve. My breathing sounded loud in my ears. The man shifted slightly, water sloshing under him. The smell intensified, now unmistakably bodily, like sickness. The road dipped suddenly, a shallow slope I knew well. I slowed more than usual. as we reached the bottom. The man lifted his arm again and pointed forward, more insistently this time. There was urgency in the movement, but still no words. His fingers looked swollen and pale, nails dark. A surge of fear finally overrode my sense of obligation. I imagined losing control, sliding into a ditch, trapped in the cold with someone whose condition I did not understand. I imagined the windows icing over completely. I imagined blacking out from panic or fumes or something else. My heart pounded. I pressed the brake hard and brought the car to a stop in the middle of the road. Snow rushed up against the bumper. The engine idled, loud in the sudden stillness. I turned my head to tell him I needed him to get out, that I would call for help. The seat beside me was empty. For a split second I thought my eyes had failed me. I looked down, then back up. The door was still closed. The lock was still down. The seat was there, soaked through fabric, dark and sagging. Water dripped from the edge onto the floor mat. The smell lingered thick in the air. I twisted around, scanning the back seat. Nothing. I looked out the windows, wiping frost with my sleeve. Snow blew past in the headlights. There was no sign of a person near the car. No footprints leading away that I could see. Just churned snow where the tires had stopped. My chest felt hollow, like all the air had been sucked out. I sat there for several seconds, unable to move. Then training from years of night driving kicked in. I put the car in park, turned on the hazard lights, and forced myself to think through possibilities. The most obvious was that he had gotten out when I stopped, somehow moving faster than I could track in the low visibility. People in distress can act unpredictably. If he had been intoxicated or delirious, he might have opened the door and stumbled off into the snowbank. In my panic, I might have missed the movement. I got out of the car, cold slamming into me. The wind cut through my clothes. Snow stung my face. I walked around the passenger side, shining my phone flashlight into the dark. The door was still shut. I opened it. Cold air poured in, and the seat steamed faintly as the warm water met the freezing night. I scanned the roadside, calling out without words, just a sound meant to get attention. The wind swallowed it. I took a few steps into the snow, boots sinking deep. My light swept over drifts, over the shallow ditch that ran parallel to the road. Nothing moved. No figure hunched or fallen, no tracks beyond my own. Fear shifted into a heavy dread. The idea that a man in that condition could be wandering out there unseen made my stomach knot. I returned to the car and closed the door, sealing in the smell and damp. I drove forward slowly, hazards on, scanning both sides of the road for any sign of him. The storm reduced visibility to a few yards. After a quarter mile, I reached a small service road branching off. I stopped again, got out, checked. Still nothing. At that point, the rational part of my mind asserted itself. I needed help. I needed someone else involved, both for the man and for myself. I drove until I found enough signal to call emergency services. My voice shook as I explained what had happened, focusing on facts, location, description, avoiding speculation. I reported a possibly ill homeless man who might be wandering near the road in dangerous conditions. They took my information and said they would dispatch a unit to search the area. They told me to stay where I was if it was safe. I pulled over as far as I could and waited, engine running, heater blasting. While I waited, I examined the passenger seat more closely. The water had soaked through to the foam, pooling beneath. It was not just melted snow. There was a darker stain mixed in, yellowed at the edges. The smell now clearly included urine. Hypothermia often causes loss of bladder control. Severe infection can too. The warmth I had felt could have been fever combined with vasodilation from alcohol or drugs. The lack of breath fog could be explained by the heater blasting warm air directly at him, dispersing it quickly. Stress can make perception unreliable. I wiped the windshield again. The frost began to clear now that the passenger door had been opened earlier and the humidity dropped. My breathing slowed. My heart rate followed. A police SUV arrived about 20 minutes later, lights flashing softly through the snow. An officer got out, bundled against the cold. I recounted everything again, showing the soaked seat, describing the direction we had been heading. He listened without interruption, then nodded. He explained that they get calls like this more often than people think. People in severe medical distress can move surprisingly fast or unpredictably. In whiteout conditions, it is easy to lose sight of someone within seconds. The officer and another who arrived shortly after searched the area on foot and with spotlights. They found no one that night. Later that morning, after I finally made it home and tried unsuccessfully to sleep, I got a call. A man matching the description had been found a few miles down the road, collapsed near an abandoned equipment shed. He was alive but in critical condition. He had severe sepsis from an untreated infection, combined with alcohol intoxication and hypothermia. The warmth I felt was real, a dangerous fever. His confusion explained the vague direction and inability to communicate. He had likely exited the car when I stopped, driven by delirium and an urge to get back to a place he associated with safety, even if that place was just a direction he remembered. The soaked seat made sense too. Snow melting off his clothes, sweat from fever, loss of bladder control. It had pooled quickly in the warm car. When I braked hard, the sudden stop and my focus on the road likely gave him the moment he needed to open the door and stumble out, disappearing into the storm within seconds. Knowing all that did not erase the feeling of that night. The memory of sitting beside someone who felt too warm in a world of ice, watching frost crawl across the glass while fear tightened my chest, still comes back in flashes. I cleaned the car the next day, shampooed the seat until my hands were raw. But the smell lingered for weeks, a faint reminder that refused to fade. I still drive that road. Every winter, when the snow falls thick and the world shrinks to the space inside my headlights, I slow down near the spot where I stopped. I scan the shoulders, the ditches, the service road. I think about how close that night came to ending differently, how thin the line was between help and harm, between understanding and fear. The explanation makes sense, the facts line up, but the experience remains etched in me, a reminder of how fragile and strange reality can feel when exhaustion, weather, and human suffering collide in the dark. I had been photographing abandoned places for years, not as a job, not for social media, but because empty structures told the truth about how people left things behind. I focused on the way nature crept back in, the way mold grew where paint once was, the way glass shattered into soft piles over time. I used an old camera, nothing fancy, because expensive gear made me feel like an outsider in places where I needed to blend in. I liked early mornings and overcast skies. I liked the quiet before the world woke up. I liked being alone. The woods where I found the tent city were not far from where I lived. That was part of what unsettled me later. At the time, it felt like a reasonable distance to explore. The area used to be logging land decades ago. There were dirt access roads half buried by leaves that led to old clearings. Most people stuck to the main trails closer to the road. I did not. I parked on the shoulder near a rusted gate and walked deeper than I usually did, following a narrow path that looked more like a deer trail than anything made by people. I was looking for an abandoned ranger station I had read about in a local forum years earlier. The post mentioned broken windows and graffiti, nothing special, but I had never seen photos of it. I wanted something untouched. The deeper I went, the quieter everything became. The forest absorbed sound in a way that made my footsteps feel loud in my own head. Leaves were damp. The air smelled like old rain and pine sap. I stopped often to check my bearings and mark landmarks so I would not get turned around. After about an hour of walking, I noticed signs that people had been there recently. Not footprints that stood out, but disturbed ground, broken branches that had not yet turned gray, and scraps of plastic caught in the undergrowth. It did not feel like a campsite. There were no fire pits or beer cans. It felt organized, intentional. That alone made me uneasy, but curiosity has always pushed me past caution. The first tent appeared between two trees on a slight rise. It was a dull green dome tent, faded from sun exposure, zipped shut. It looked clean. Too clean, like it had been placed there carefully rather than used. A few steps farther, another tent appeared, then another. They were spaced evenly, not clustered. A path ran through them, flattened dirt with leaves pushed aside, like a small street. I stopped moving and listened. There was no sound of people. No coughing, no shifting fabric, no voices carried on the air. I expected at least something. The woods were not silent, but the sounds were distant, muted, as if this area had its own atmosphere. I told myself it was just a camp set up during the day while people were away. That explanation did not sit well, but I held on to it because it was normal. As I walked farther into the clearing, I realized there were more tents than I could count at first glance. Dozens of them, maybe more, arranged in rows that curved slightly with the terrain. Some were newer, bright nylon in blues and reds. Others were old, patched with tape, their poles slightly bent. Every tent had something written on it near the entrance. At first, I thought they were brand names or markings from a manufacturer. Then I got closer. They were names. Full names, written in black marker, neat and legible. First and last names, some with middle initials. The writing style was consistent across all of them. Same size, same pressure, same careful spacing. Someone had taken their time. I felt a tightness in my chest that had nothing to do with fear yet. It was more confusion than anything. People in tent cities marked their spaces sometimes, but this was different. It felt official, almost administrative. I took out my camera and raised it, then hesitated. Photographing personal information felt wrong. I lowered it again and kept walking. That was when I noticed the lines. Some of the names had a single thick line drawn through them. Not scribbled out, not messy. One deliberate stroke, from left to right. The marker ink looked fresh on some, faded on others. I counted as I walked, without meaning to. There were more crossed-out names than untouched ones. I tried to tell myself this was a memorial of some kind, or a record of people who had moved on. But there were no decorations, no notes, no signs of mourning. No candles, no flowers. Just tents and names. I kept moving deeper, my body tense in a way I could not fully explain. I started to feel watched, but not in the dramatic sense. There was no rush of panic, no urge to run. It was more like awareness, the sense that I was in a place not meant for wandering. Then I saw my name. It was on a tent identical to the first one I had seen. Same faded green fabric, same position relative to the path. My full name was written clearly, spelled correctly. I had a common first name, but my last name was not something you guessed. It was not crossed out. I stood there longer than I should have. I examined the tent from a distance, looking for signs of a prank. No camera equipment around. No fresh footprints. No sign that someone was nearby waiting for a reaction. The name was not smudged. It had not been written hastily. It looked like all the others. I did not open the tent. I did not touch it. I did not take a photo of it. I turned around and walked back the way I came, slowly at first, then faster as the path narrowed and the tents fell behind me. I did not run. I did not look back. I focused on keeping my breathing steady and my steps quiet. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking. I sat in the driver's seat with the doors locked, staring through the windshield at the trees. I stayed there for a long time before starting the engine. On the drive home, I tried to come up with explanations that did not involve someone knowing me personally. A data breach, a stolen database, something pulled from social media. But the thought that someone had carried that knowledge into the woods and written it on a tent felt deeply wrong. I did not tell anyone about it. I did not post about it. I did not go back. I stayed inside for the rest of the day, reviewing old photos on my computer, trying to ground myself in routine. That night, I slept poorly. I kept waking up, convinced I had heard movement outside my apartment. The next day passed without incident. I went to work, answered emails, did normal things. I checked my bank account and credit reports, expecting signs of identity theft. Everything was normal. I checked my social media privacy settings, though they were already locked down. I felt foolish, paranoid, but the image of that tent stayed with me. 2 days later, I found my wallet in the woods near my house. There was a small wooded area behind my apartment complex, more of a green buffer than real forest. I walked through it sometimes as a shortcut to the store. That afternoon, I took that path out of habit. About halfway through, I saw something dark near the base of a tree. At first, I thought it was a piece of bark. Then I recognized the worn leather. My wallet was lying open on the ground. The cards were still inside, arranged the way I kept them. My cash was untouched. There were no signs of damage, no moisture, no dirt ground into the seams. It looked like it had been placed there carefully. I knew I had not lost it. I was meticulous about my belongings. I checked my pockets constantly. The wallet had been on my desk that morning when I left for work. I remembered setting it there while I grabbed my keys. I picked it up with numb fingers and closed it. I scanned the area, expecting to see someone watching from behind the trees. There was no one. Just the sound of traffic in the distance and a few birds moving through the canopy. I walked straight home and locked the door behind me. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the wallet again, this time slowly. Everything looked normal until I reached the back compartment, where I kept old receipts and a folded photo of my parents. There was another photo tucked behind it. It was a printed photograph, slightly glossy, the kind you get from a basic print service. It showed the tent with my name on it. The angle was close, centered, taken at eye level. The lighting suggested early morning or late afternoon. The name on the tent was crossed out. I stared at that photo until my eyes hurt. I tried to remember every image I had taken that day in the woods. I had reviewed them already. None of them showed that tent. None of them were printed. I did not own a printer. The crossing out of my name was done with the same thick marker stroke I had seen on the others. The line was dark and solid. There was no bleeding through the paper. The photo had been taken after I left, or at least after the line had been drawn. I did not call the police. I considered it, but I knew how it would sound. A tent city with names in the woods. A wallet that reappeared. A photo with no clear source. There was no crime, not in a way that fit a report. I would be told to secure my belongings and stay aware of my surroundings. Instead, I started documenting everything for myself. I wrote down the exact location of the tent city as best I could remember. I wrote down the date and time I found the wallet. I took photos of the wallet where I found it, of the photo itself, of the surrounding area. I saved copies in multiple places. I also started paying closer attention to patterns in my life that I had ignored before. I reviewed old photographs I had posted publicly over the years. In several of them, I noticed people in the background that I had never paid attention to. Not the same person every time, but people who were watching rather than passing through. People standing still while others moved. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I could not stop seeing it. I looked back at my routes, the abandoned places I favored. They were predictable. I went alone. I went off trail. I stayed for hours. I carried expensive equipment and advertised my locations indirectly through the types of structures I posted. Anyone paying attention could have built a profile of me without much effort. The tent city began to make sense in a way that scared me more than any supernatural explanation. It was not a memorial. It was a ledger. I found a news article from a nearby county about a group that targeted isolated individuals. They were not killers in the way movies portray. They were facilitators. They identified people who would not be missed quickly, people who moved alone, people who documented their own habits publicly. They sold that information. Sometimes the targets disappeared. Sometimes they were robbed, stalked, pressured. The article was vague, careful not to invite panic. The tents were placeholders, names of people under observation. Crossed out names were people who were no longer relevant, for one reason or another. Moved away, changed habits, or worse. My name had not been crossed out when I found it, because I was still active, still predictable. After I left and did not return, after I altered my routines without announcing it, after I stopped posting, someone updated the record. They crossed my name out and made sure I knew it. The wallet was proof of access. The photo was proof of proximity. A message delivered without words. I moved out of that apartment within a month. I sold most of my equipment. I stopped exploring abandoned places alone. I deleted old posts and changed how I lived in small but deliberate ways. I did not vanish, but I became less visible. I never went back to the woods where the tent city was. Months later, I checked satellite images of the area out of morbid curiosity. The clearing was gone, reclaimed by brush and shadow. No sign that it had ever existed. I still think about the crossed-out names. I think about how many people never saw their own tent. I think about how close I came to becoming something that ended without explanation. What happened to me was not a warning. It was a confirmation that I had been seen, measured, and dismissed. The most terrifying part was not the tents or the photo. It was how easy it had been for someone to know me better than I knew them, and how quietly they let me know I was never alone.